Okay, Carlos, I got it all set for you. I just got to remember when I'm done here to switch the mic type back to dynamic, because I'm just using one of these mics because it was sitting here on the table. So the one thing I'll say about these radios, for someone that likes AM, and of course, you know, everybody has a responsibility as an operator to choose how to run your equipment. And a lot of times the radio falls back on the design of it. So there's not a lot of things I can change to really make this radio any worse or better than it already is. Basically, I just clean up the sideband, which does improve it quite a bit. But the AM aspect of these radios, yes, I do adjust the timing for about 96% with a 1K tone. But what we have to remember is this radio has high level modulation, so when the carrier is low, the timing is almost disabled in a lot of ways. So the AMC circuit kind of shuts itself off with voice. It needs a steady tone to really clamp down. Like a 1K tone is perfect, you can control it. But our human voice, it has so many different variables and tolerances and stuff. It cannot. It could if they had the different firmware in here, but they want a certain type of preference for this radio, and they've been very successful with what they've done for the certain operating style. It may not be my style per se, but a lot of guys really like this, and I'm going to demonstrate what I mean here. So first, to make people understand maybe what I'm saying, you know, we'll put the 1K tone in first. Now this is about a 1 watt carrier on this radio, so it's not very going to be very powerful under the tone, and some guys may not like that, but what you will like is when I speak with my voice. So what I'm going to do here is raise this reference level bring this reference level up in dBm, so we can see more information here. And then I'm just going to send the 1K tone in, and when you first saw it ramped up and then it clamped down, well, that makes sense because with our human voice it's up and down, up and down, up and down, so it never really clamps down. And that's probably why a lot of guys like these radios, because there's a distortion factor when that is like really high and spread out. And people can say what they wish about, oh, he doesn't know how to set up a radio and all this and poke fun, but you know, unless you start changing firmware in the radio, which nobody's going to be able to do except the factory, or maybe some really technical people could rewrite firmware code. And why would you want to? Because this radio markets to a certain operating preference already. But I mean, that looks outstanding with the 1K tone, so there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But what we have to remember here, and what a lot of people don't really ever talk about, is once you take the tone out of the equation, a lot of things change. And right now this one's sitting at about 93%, so even after I set it, and I just set it for about 96, obviously it changed a little bit. It's not a bad thing or anything like that, but you can see where it's at. And I find that that's probably the better way to go, is a little bit lower here anyways, only because of what's going to happen when we're not under a tone. We're just flat out talking with voice. So let's do that. Let's get out of here, and we'll come here, and we'll put the mic on here now, so we could all agree that it's about 4 times the power, or just about. So now I put the mic on here, and with the microphone on here, you can see now on the spectrum analyzer that you know, we're still looking at one channel each side. Each far end of the screen is the center of the next channel on this band, and it doesn't look horrible. But what we're going to see here is when I come over to the meter, there's going to be or every once in a while, there's going to be a big shoot in power. So let's take a look at that. So there's our carrier, and then, you know, sometimes with me just talking, I'm not screaming, I'm not yelling, I'm not getting all crazy into it. You know, there's times to where that power shoots way up, and it's pretty quick, but it's there. And that's why I'm saying that's the design of the radio. That's in firmware. That was made like that purposely for, I think, a certain operating preference, you know. And if you turn up the carrier ever so slightly, I think it's going to probably do more on those peaks. So let's try that. go from like 1 to 2. Pretty close. So there's about 2, and probably what will end up happening is the peaks will come up a little bit more because the carriers came up, and that kind of thing. So, you know, there's an operating preference in America for AM that really likes this, and this is why they have this specifically made in firmware to do this versus other radios that don't do it. And again, I'm on the fence. I actually prefer the other way myself, but I know that majority of people in the 11-meter hobby would prefer it like this. So it can go both ways, you know. And now we'll go to 3 watts. So here's 3 watts right here. At a certain point, it will actually start to not go as high from such a low. Like at the very end, I think I set it for about 16, and then it goes to like 100. That's still over 4 times. But as we can see now, it's getting a little more consistent at that higher power range. And that is in firmware. That's the design of this radio. So there's differences in all these radios, and this is probably the one that most of the guys that really enjoy AM would like the most. So here's 8 watts. So at 8 watts, we're almost seeing full power out of the radio, which at times we pretty much do, because it's about a 100-watt radio, give or take. So, you know. And then at 16 watts, that's pretty much when the radio is doing the full output. And the modulation percentage here is still probably about 96% or so. But all in all, it's a powerful and very loud radio, and it's due to some of the timing characteristics in this radio that make it a little bit different. But guys really like that. So, you know, it is what it is. It's very clean on equipment under test. With voice in the real world, it's probably not as clean. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, because I think that's what the market is. The market doesn't want a super clean radio on AM, and that's technically what they're giving. So under equipment, it's great. But outside of equipment, it kind of is what it is. You know, there are other radios, they are very clean, and they don't do what this radio does from that low carrier. And again, I kind of prefer the other way myself. That's my preference, but everybody's preference is different. So that's kind of how that works. Just wanted to cover that. So sideband on this radio is going to be really clean. I did adjust it to about the 24 mark, like I always do, and this is just like on par with all the other ones. I mean, it's super clean on sideband versus, you know, anything else that we could compare it to that I would adjust. But AM on this, if you compare this to like the QT80 or something, as far as like RF cleanliness, the QT80 is hands down going to win, because it's a much cleaner AM performer, because the AMC circuit actually does clamp and hold, you know, the level of modulation more realistically, whereas this radio really just kind of comes unleashed. And people that would say, well, we need to do an NPC mod and all that to this radio, is totally untrue, because the radio pretty much is written like that in firmware to already do that. So you don't need to do anything. I mean, yeah, you can adjust the timing, and I've already done that in the service mode. And I just want to check it one last time, because after you use it, sometimes they do change. But, you know, this is going to my friend Carlos in Ohio, and I think he'll appreciate how this radio runs. I think he appreciates both ways, because he has other radios of mine that I set up for him that are very clean too. Okay, so they do change just a little bit from time to time under the tone. So we'll kind of bring it back up to that 96%. Not that it makes a huge difference or anything, but we can see here under a tone kind of where our carrier is, and then when we modulate it, you saw it ramp up and then kind of clamp down. So that's normal for how the radio works under a tone. It's beautiful. The difference is, outside of the tone with your voice, there's an NPC factor, or whatever you want to call it, factor. It's something written in the firmware to allow this thing to really go beyond where it should. And they do that because that's what their market is asking for. You know, that's all that is. So let's take a look at the low power modulation again, because I need to adjust that some more. Oh, that's too much. That's better. So again, it's, you know, equipment wise, nothing wrong with it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it otherwise, but just realize that, you know, outside of being on test equipment, the radio has its own characteristics. So obviously 1 watt, 4.44. It's staying there because everything is constant. The amplitude is constant. You know, if we were to vary the amplitude, and I don't know if I could do that just by doing this. I don't even think that would do it. I think I would have to vary the actual frequency, because the human voice has so many different frequencies. At a certain point it'll stop modulating because we get too high in frequency, but even then it's a little harder to try to mimic what I'm trying to do. But you can see how it's changing a little bit. See how it went up? I'm just trying to vary the tone, frequency of the tone a little bit, but you know, with voice, it was designed that way. It was purposely made that way to do that. So it's a little harder to mimic it with human. Human voice is much different than a test tone, so we have to remember that too. But like I said before, it's the design of the radio. A lot of guys, they want that. This radio wouldn't be successful if it wasn't like that. I think that's what the market calls for, so that's what they've given. And the version 2 is the same way. This one just does more power, so that's all that is. And for those that want to say whatever they want to say, and oh my god, you know, it is what it is. You know, there's a radio for every operating style. So again, this is with the power all the way up. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, check, check, hello, 1, 2. This will be the most contained because, you know, a higher carrier, less chance of that really forward momentum. And then if we just lower it down all the way again, that 1 watt mark, and you can see right there that 70, 60. If you look at this, if you were to look at the scope when it does that, you see a huge swath on the scope. But that is the design of the radio, hands down. And you know, some guys really like that, and that's what they want. So, you know, can't change how the radio is made, and never claim to. But all in all, you know, that's what makes these radios popular, I think. So there you have it, Carlos. I think you'll like it, and it'll be heading to you tomorrow. So probably you'll get it on Tuesday. 73, and I appreciate the pre-order on this one.